for Jesus. There's an important Jewish historian named Josephus, and we're going to spend some time talking about his contribution to historical Jesus conversation. Well, who was Josephus? Well, he was actually a general who fought against the Romans, and in AD 67, he was defeated at Gamla. A couple weeks ago, Craig Evans showed you a picture of some ruins at Gamla, if you remember that. Well, shortly after he was defeated, he started to write to explain Judaism to the Romans. He produced this massive work called The Antiquities of the Jews. It's a 20-volume set, and it's basically his take on Jewish history starting in Genesis 1 all the way up to his present time. Well, if you read Book 18, in units 63 and 64, you can read a first-century, non-Christian, Jewish testimony to Jesus. And I want to walk through this text together with you. Josephus writes, "There was about this time Jesus, a wise man." Now let me explain the brackets. In the brackets are things that Josephus probably did not write, because Josephus was a Jew. He was not a follower of Jesus. He was not a Messianic Jew. And so there are certain things in here that don't sound like things Jewish people would write. Even though he was a Jew, the existing copies of his work were written by Christian scribes, and it seems like they added a few things. Maybe they didn't feel comfortable writing only what Josephus wrote about Jesus. Maybe they wanted to fill out some of the detail with what they believed about Jesus. But the point is that these things are very easy to spot, and so we can put them in the brackets here. The text goes on, "If it be lawful to call him a man." Well, that kind of makes it sound like he's more than a man, right? But if you're Jewish, like Josephus, you're not going to write that. And so most historians recognize this bit about if it be lawful to call him a man actually doesn't go back to Josephus. But a lot of the other parts of this passage actually do. Take a look at the next section. "For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ." Now that's another addition that we put in the brackets there because, again, as a Jewish person, he's not going to say Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. But he probably wrote something like, he was called the Christ. He was called the Christ. And keep that in mind because we're going to come back to that in just a minute. "And Pilate," he goes on, "and when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him." Now don't miss this. This is a first-century Jewish historian writing about the Jewish role in Jesus' death. And he says it's that some of the Jewish leaders had a hand in this. Some of our own people, he says, are the ones who put Pilate up to this. And this is exactly what we read in the Gospels. You can look at Mark 14, for example, and read about Jesus' Jewish examination at his trial before he was publicly executed. Then there's another bracketed section. "For he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him." That's not Josephus. "And the tribe of Christians," look at the last part, "the tribe of Christians so named for him are not extinct at this day." Well, that's not a problem. Josephus knew about the movement that was linked to Jesus' name, and it actually seems like he's kind of surprised here that they're even still around. And so what you get here in this passage that we've read is the core of what Josephus wrote with some annotations from a Christian scribe. Now check this out. He was a doer of wonderful works. Remember that part? Josephus wrote in Greek. First time I ever opened up Josephus' Antiquities, I'm like, wow, it's in Greek. I thought Josephus was a Jew. I thought he would write in Hebrew, right? But he's writing in Greek. Remember, he's writing for the Romans to help them understand Judaism. And when he talks about Jesus as doing wonderful works, that word wonderful there is the Greek word paradoxon. And it's kind of like, it sounds like the English word paradox, right? But this meant amazing things, unusual things, strange things. Jesus was known for the kinds of unusual and surprising things that he did. Now, some people know about the discussion surrounding this text and the brackets and all that. Some people don't, though. And many people have gotten this idea that the whole passage in Josephus about Jesus was forged, and none of it goes back to Josephus. So let me make a suggestion. If you're sharing this with somebody and they tell you that you can't use Josephus as a source because that part where he mentions Jesus is a total forgery, ask them this question. Which one? Which one? Because besides the mention of Jesus in book 18, Josephus mentions Jesus again in book 20. Remember, this is a 20-volume work, and he has another opportunity to mention Jesus when he talks about Jesus' brother James and how he was killed. Take a look at this. He says, a man named James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, was put on trial in Jerusalem. Now, there's no controversy about this one. This is in book 20, section 200. There's no controversy about this one. Historians love to find things like this where he is just mentioning Jesus to explain who James is. He's just explaining who James is by connecting him to his more famous brother. And it's interesting, this is really kind of different than the way that Christians would refer to James as the brother of the Lord. Here he says, James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ. Remember in book 18, he was called the Christ? It's like he was saying, you remember how I wrote about this guy, this Jesus, back in book 18, the one who did all those amazing, wonderful works, strange, unusual things? The Jesus who was called the Christ? That guy. And so when it comes to Josephus, most historians recognize that when you take away the edits that got into the text sometime in the 8th century or earlier, that we have this historical core that's evidence of Jesus outside the Bible. And this from a Jewish historian writing about the Jewish role in Jesus' death. You also see this in the Jewish Talmud. It's a later source, but you still see this idea that Jesus was crucified. It says on the eve of the Passover, Yeshu was hanged. And this is a euphemism for crucifixion. Something else that we know about Jesus from the Jewish Talmud and from Jewish tradition is that he was believed to have done miracles. Jewish people had called him a sorcerer, had called him a magician, because they did not deny the fact that Jesus did miracles. Again, there's no ancient source that says we don't know if Jesus did miracles or not. There's no source that says he faked his miracles. You know what the question of the day was? Where did the power come from? The question was, where did the power come from? There were only two options in the minds of ancient people. The power either came from above or it came from below. Nobody questioned if Jesus did any miracles. They debated over where the power came from. And so this is evidence that Jesus was in fact known for the surprising things that he did. These were the options on the table. Some people thought that Jesus was from God. Other people thought he wasn't. But either way, there's no ancient evidence that people who opposed Christianity said he never lived, he never existed. Everybody knew that Jesus was for real.